Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of CPO Perspective with my guest today, Paul Maraselling. Paul, welcome.
Thank you, Richard. Glad to be here.
Well, here is quite a long way from where I am. So perhaps you'd like to tell us a little bit about what you're up to.
Yeah, so I'm currently in Vancouver, North Vancouver in Canada. I've been here off and on for the last 23 years. My wife is actually from here, and that was one of the drivers to move here. But in my time in North Vancouver, I've been in and out of different industries, different organizations, and the current company I'm working for at the moment is a marine construction company, which is going through an expansion process in terms of some strategic asset buys and growing the organization across Western Canada and then into hopefully Eastern Canada. And again, my role here is really to centralize the procurement function and build out a brand new organization to support the expanding business.
Wonderful. Now, I am going to say I'm a little bit caught out because when we did the prep call for this, you were in cycling gear on your way to work. And now I feel decidedly underdressed. But in my defense, it is the first sunny day for what feels like a lifetime. So look, I mean, Canada. Okay, so you're in Canada. What was your journey? I mean, how did you get into procurement? And I think you gave a clue with your wife, but I mean, how did you end up where you are now?
Yeah, so good question. So again, let's check back to your point about the last time we spoke. I was in my cycling gear. I'm a regular cyclist. I also still compete at track and field in the senior categories when I get the opportunity. But yeah, part of that journey was when I left school. I didn't think university was the direction I wanted to go in. I thought let's go into industry, let's do that. But I wanted to find myself a role that gave me a little bit of flexibility of being in an office style environment, but also something that got me out and about. I didn't want to be stuck on a 9 to 5 in an office. I didn't see me as being a particularly good sales-orientated person. And then I got an offer through one of the careers groups to say, would you like to go and be an assistant buyer at a domestic appliance manufacturer? And I thought, okay, let's go and sound it out. So I went in, met the then purchasing manager, had a great rapport with him. He again was into various sports, which were similar to what I was in. But one of the key pieces for me in terms of that sporting, cycling, running piece was most weekends I was going somewhere to do something. And at that particular time, that organization had a 4:00 finish on a Friday, and it thought, oh, this would be great. It means I could get away, I can get to where I want to be, without the sort of the hassles. So that was one of the pivotal things. But the actual description of the role, how it was going to sort of morph for the domestic appliance company, that really sort of resonated with me. And I thought, yeah, that sounds really good. Let's go from there. So I jumped in and got my grounding in procurement there. And for the rest of my time, I would say, being in the UK, I worked in different industries. I worked in telecoms, I worked in aviation, I worked in engineering, and I sort of progressed through all the different facets of project buying to flow line production buying. And then again, really, I'd say probably British Airways was the one that really opened my mind up to global strategic sourcing. And I will say that the BA were very good at support and sponsorship to allow people to develop their careers. And I had to be grateful for that. And then I took all the learning from that and then actually moved to what morphed into Virgin Media, which was Telewest prior to that. And I had the great opportunity of joining Telewest just as they were merging a series of smaller cable TV companies. And my remit really was to develop and build out a robust procurement organization to support Telewest. It was right at the pivotal point when e-procurement suites were starting to be developed, auctions were starting to happen, and I really was able to embrace that and build a team accordingly. Telewest then merged with NTL, and we knew at that point, at some point, someone may come along and buy us, and of course, Virgin came along and bought us. But at the same time for that, part of my remit, I'd been around the globe working for those companies in different jurisdictions, have been introduced to my soon-to-be wife, and then got married, stayed in the UK for a while, but then thought, why don't I take my good skill set? There seemed to be great opportunity in Canada, especially Western Canada. So I moved to Canada. And then again, for the organizations I've worked for in Western Canada, a lot of them have been in those sort of greenfield sites where procurement really isn't or hasn't been a function in the organization. And I've come in and been able to set up and develop and put in place the rudimentaries of a centralized or a procurement group. And that's been in different industries, from telecom to athletic apparel, and to where I am now in construction. And again, a little bit of in between of that, I did work for one of the global consultancies, looking after a couple of major accounts in North America. So that's sort of my journey. And, in the time, as I say, I've been in Canada for 23 years. I've actually been based in other jurisdictions around North America and spent some time back in the UK working for some good organizations. So it's been a bit of a gypsy lifestyle. I would say, if someone said to me when I first started at the domestic appliance company, hey, you're going to get the ability to travel, you're going to get the ability to, spend money and meet and negotiate with people, I would have said, sign me up straight away. But I've enjoyed every moment of it, and it's been a great experience, and it's where I am.
It's interesting because, I mean, you're actually a rare breed. I mean, the number of people that actually start and stay within procurement is I'm discovering is surprisingly small. But one word that kept cropping up throughout that was Greenfield. I mean, is that something that you love or look for?
It is. It's something I enjoy, sort of building something out. I've worked for some organizations which already, we call it the brownfield sites. They've had an established setup, but you come in and look at it and say, hey, there's a better way of doing this. There's a more robust or efficient way of doing it. But yes, I would say probably that, as I say, that great knowledge base and that great opportunity I had in the UK to develop those skills. Western Canada is very much in that sort of formative growth phase for the last sort of 20 years, that a lot of companies are now looking at procurement as a strategic function, as opposed to being that transactional shifting bits of paper. And there's been, opportunity with some of those organizations to do that. And it's been a good experience, and be able to take that. And I would say, if someone said to me, hey, we have a role, it's either working for an established organization which has everything in place, or someone says it's Greenfield, I would definitely divert to the Greenfield side, because I think there's a great way to develop and have your own sort of future in your hands, to be able to have control over it.
Yeah,
rather than working in lanes.
And it's interesting you mentioned this maturity thing. I mean, this is going to be a huge generalization, and I'll get shot down in flames by my North American friends. But as a generalization, one of the things that I observe is that Europe versus North America. Europe tends to be, I believe, more mature in terms of technology and process, and operating within a sort of highly and increasingly regulated environment. But I believe North America is and always has been ahead on relationships. It's much more focused on relationships with suppliers and talking to people, which is something that actually in Europe is becoming a bit of a lost art. I mean, is that something? I mean, tell me if I'm wrong, but or is that something that you recognise?
No, I definitely recognise that, and I would say I'm going to disagree to you a little bit on that.
Absolutely.
In terms of, I would say, that maturity curve in terms of where they are compared. If we say Europe is the baseline, whereas specifically Canada, probably not so much the US, but Canada, they're definitely behind the curve. They're I'm going to be brutal and say it's probably about 10 years behind. And the only reason I say that is a lot of what I call the expats from Europe that come over that I meet on a regular basis, and we get together. We always talk about, we've done that and we've had that. Now we're starting to introduce that into Canada. Canada is starting to make a little bit of catch up, but it's more so not that the skills and the people aren't here to make it happen. It's just the organizations haven't, again, got to that maturity point to really embrace it. So it's very much, coming back to that Greenfield site piece, it's very much trying to push the agenda and convincing them that that's the way to go. In terms of the relationship management with the vendors and suppliers, again, I would say the US is way more proactive on that. And in some of the Greenfield sites I've worked on in Canada, there is a little bit of that sort of vendor management, vendor relationship piece. But it's not it's not as active as I would say in the past. And I'll give you a good working example of that. Again, with my time with British Airways, they were very much into that development of the suppliers, making sure we had the right suppliers, working with the suppliers, really leveraging that knowledge base of the suppliers to help us develop our product portfolio and how we operate. A couple of organizations I've worked for here in Canada, I've said, hey, we need to embrace the vendors, the suppliers. We need to have a vendor day. We need to, educate them about the strategic direction we are going in. And some of the pushback is, well, maybe in a few years' time, I don't think there's value. But it's, again, making sure that they understand it does create value. It does deliver something to the organization. So, yeah, there's been a few struggles to get there, but, a couple of organizations have embraced it. But yeah, there's still more work to be done.
Right. Well, look, thank you for painting the picture and quite rightly challenging me on my mistaken generalizations. Right. From where you're sat, if you look at our profession and, and what's going on, I suppose, in the world as it affects our profession, what's on your mind at the moment? What's either your worry bead or your hope, or what's your perspective?
I would say, obviously, the current global economic situation has put a real sort of pressure on us as an organization. As I said before, we're very much in this growth mode. We're very much developing the different business lines, and we're sourcing strategically across the globe now, as opposed to being more North American focused. So some of the challenges for me in terms of the sourcing, getting the right people in place, is a lot of the vessels that we use for the organization through scows, barges, cranes, and the heavy engineering equipment, we're buying outside of North America. But with the things like tariffs and fuel, that is proving difficult to manage in terms of making sure we have that. But the other piece for me that, bringing that knowledge base, bringing that skill set into the organization is, looking at the cradle to grave options. Yes, we've just structured a deal with a European crane manufacturer for the next few years. But we've also now got within our agreement with them an exit strategy. So once it becomes end of life for us, we know that we're going to get rid of those effectively. And again, in terms of things like barges, scows, and derricks, which we're buying, from major shipbuilders, I'm going to say primarily in Asia. Again, we're looking at how do we get rid of those once they're end of life, and that again is built into what we're doing with the vendor base and the contracts we have. So,
I'm going to ask. I can guess, but barges, scows, and derricks. I mean, every procurement function has got their own language, but go on, help us. What are they?
Okay, all right. So a scow is basically a vessel that you pour stuff into. It could be coal, it could be wood chips, it could be rubble, it could be anything. And then you just tug that around, tow it around wherever you need to take it. A derrick and a barge is really something that has functionality to it. So you may have a drilling rig on it, you may have a series of cranes on it, and they're doing things like dredging work, or you are actually have a crane unit on there that's driving steel piles into the ground. So the actual barge derrick piece is much more a functional piece of equipment, whereas a scow itself is just like a big wheelbarrow on the water.
Thank you.
Yes, but thank you.
I could get myself educated. It's always good. And do you know what? But this is the fascinating thing. Procurement is such a wide and varied thing, and you make it sound like these are small, simple pieces. But now that we know what they are, I mean, these are big pieces of heavy construction equipment.
Yes.
And now the complication around them is all the more apparent.
Yes, and that's the thing. We're not. It's not, in relative terms, it's not small money. You're looking at 1.2, 1.3 million US for a scow. A crane, you're looking at 1.4, 1.5 million in euros. So it's an expensive buy if you take it that way. And then obviously getting the ROI, the utilization out of those pieces of equipment, it's important to make sure that it's going to pay for itself. So and as I say, we as an organization now are actually in that little bit of ascendancy. So we actually have the opportunity to do that and bring that strategic procurement skills into where do we want to be in 2028, how are we going to get there, and how are we going to align, back to your point, how are we going to get the vendors and suppliers aligned to support us in that journey.
I'd love, I'm genuinely interested, right? You like doing Greenfield, and Greenfield, yes, depending on your I guess your personality type, you're either, a head of procurement CPO that comes in and goes, right, I'm going to build my operating model, my process, my data, my tech stack, or
Yes.
you're the kind of CPO that says, actually, I'm going to focus on delivering the outcomes, and I'm going to let the rest of that catch up organically as and when I need to. I mean, where are you on that spectrum?
I'm definitely in the first part. That's where we are. I wouldn't say for all the organisations I've worked for in Canada have been in that point. Some have been across the other side of it.
Right.
But no, that's where we are at the moment, and that's I'd say that's the thing that gets me out of bed every day is the excitement to get me there. So yeah,
That's cool. And as you look at what you're doing now, I mean, is there anything that you think is just either a threat or an opportunity that's, apart from, God forbid, tariffs and business and everything else that's going on in the world, but, as you look at your team and what you do and that tech stack and data stack, all the rest of it, what is there anything that's sort of like, there's a cloud that you're worried about that you're trying to deal with?
Yeah, I'd say internally, it's the pace.
Ah,
In terms of bringing everybody along, providing the right sort of strategic direction, justifying the strategic direction of where we go. The other piece for me is as we grow is getting the right skill sets and people in to help develop that through a procurement
right.
function. And then also doing that internal education piece, everybody else understands, what we do, how we do it, why we're doing it. And even if there isn't what I call operational alignment, it's then how do you then bring everybody along to understand what's happening? But I think the key cloud for us as a organization is fuel is very much an integral part of making our operation run. And that's always one of the criteria we have to think about is that the cost of fuel going to be limiting in terms of how we expand, how we actually operate? That's always a serious challenge.
I'm going to confess that when you said operation alignment isn't quite there, my head was filled with an image of a almost theatrically swarthy Western Canadian operations manager, complete with check shirt, looking at you in a funny way when you try to tell him about a purchase order. I mean, that's what sprung into my mind.
Yeah, okay. And I get the image, but it's not quite that. It's part of I call it the industry. The industry's had, like all industries, it's had a certain way it operates, certain way it works. There's certain protocols, ways that people interact. Okay. Some of them are very good because you can leverage those. Others really need to be more robust because they're wide open to additional costs, the way things are put together. So it's trying to just channel the operation to say, look, here's a great opportunity. Let's leverage it. Let's use those networks. Let's use those people to leverage something use that classic win-win for both parties. But then where there's risk and where there's opportunity to do better, let's do that. And back to your thing about the operations manager with his check shirt and have a PO in front of him. It's moving that mindset from saying, this is my initial purchase that I'm looking at, and it might be for a year, it might be for 2 years, to let's think strategically. How do we do something better than that? How do we, leverage what we're doing? How can we look at simple things like rebates, spend, development of ideas and way of developing it? It's saying, okay, we've got a purchase order, yes, great, but let's think beyond that. And it is a challenge. And again, part of why I'm where I am at the moment, I enjoy what I do, is with all the various business units we had various business units doing procurement, but there was no traditional consolidation. There was no meeting of the minds to say, hey, we're all using the same vendors. We're all doing this. And all the operation managers have just got their execution in front of them. So it's how do you bring them together? How do you make them see the bigger picture?
And it sounds to me in that piece that actually soft skills are really quite important compared to perhaps pure play procurement hard skills.
Yes. And I would say, again, a majority of my time on the Greenfield sites is, yes, there's a remit to establish a process, procedure, skill sets, resources to support that. But it's also that upselling of what can be done. how it can be done, and bringing those people from the different functional areas together to be aligned to that. And you're always going to get the challenge that there's always going to be areas of the organization that don't see the value in procurement. And I'm sure you've heard it, procurement doesn't understand marketing. Procurement doesn't understand IT. And apologies to any of my IT and marketing colleagues. That's not a snip at you, but it's and there is some truth in that. At the end of the day, procurement as a function, you could have a category specialist that knows the industry out, or some organizations you don't have that bandwidth. So you have to get someone to manage that portfolio, but you can still leverage the great skill set and knowledge of the people you're working with to help you find the better commercial deal for the organization. And that's where that relationship management, that building the rapport comes into it. So
there we go. Well, look, thank you for sharing. And I suppose just one final question, as always, which is, to someone who's just starting out on their procurement journey, what would your advice to them be?
I would say go for it, embrace it. The procurement function, being a procurement person, buyer, senior buyer, strategic, whatever, it's a great opportunity to have a major impact on organizations. For me, procurement has gone through the whole transactional e-procurement piece, and we're coming out the other end of now we're very much that strategic asset for organizations. So if you're coming into that new, there's way more to procurement than there was 10, 15, 20 years ago. And, for me, procurement is going to become a function where it's actually going to be not so much about raising POs and, placing an order. It's going to be much more about, making sure that the business is going in the right strategic direction, adding value through, looking at those opportunities, actually getting out. And if you're someone who likes to be out and about rather than sitting at a desk, it's definitely a profession that's going to allow you to do that.
What a lovely thought. And sound advice. It's a wonderful profession. Paul, thank you very much for joining me, and thank you for sharing your journey. And listen, good luck with all the cycling competitions.
Yes.
And look, to those, if you're watching online, if you would like to comment, please do. If you want to come and share your journey as a senior procurement leader, please just reach out. It would be a pleasure to talk to you. But for today, Paul, thank you very much indeed. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I suppose hosting the World Cup.
Yes, and Canada had a great win in Vancouver last night. So being downtown in Vancouver last night was awesome.
I can imagine it was. Even more awesome if you're ever in a town where the Scottish are, because apparently they're great fun and they're drinking everywhere dry.
Yes, exactly.
Oh,
yeah. So no. All right. Richard, as always, a pleasure.
Thank you. And see you next time. Bye-bye.